Hey everyone, Tim here from SnapAttack. Let's dig into this week's Threat Snapshot. So today we're going to be talking about Empire, which for those of you know is an open source command and control framework that's been around for several years. There was an update in the project earlier this week and it hit a new milestone. So the core framework itself, Empire, has been upgraded to version 5.0 and has a lot of new features. And then the new GUI that BC Security created, Starkiller 2.0, was also released. So can take a look at the feature list, the changelog, see a lot of the things that they've updated. Really useful for red teamers for tracking their activities, additional features, and also being able to collaborate with the blue teams. I mean, even if you just kind of browse the Twitter account, you'll see a lot of different post-exploitation modules, also mapped to, MITRE ATT&CK, being able to see, various IOCs that are left behind from your campaign. Lots of cool things here. So again, as I mentioned, this is open source. So Spectre Ops originally created PowerShell Empire back in the day, and this was really to raise awareness of the security considerations of PowerShell. Things have evolved a long time since then. If you remember way back when, they didn't have the PowerShell module and script block logging and additional telemetry data on the endpoint, and Microsoft has really stepped up their game around PowerShell. So the Spectre Ops maintainers thought it would be worthwhile to, again, close the tool, and this is where BC Security kind of picked up and ran with it. So lots of things have changed. If you used to know it as PowerShell Empire, there's a lot of additional changes here around evasion, additional modules, support for Python, C#, has other sort of kind of built-in things. It's looking a lot more kind of like a Cobalt Strike, if you will. So this is, definitely something to check out. Threat actors, red teams, others do use it. So we're going to look at two specific modules here. And again, these aren't necessarily tied to the 5.0 release, but these are some of the newer features of Empire and definitely worth taking a look at. So one thing that always is very interesting and challenging when you're establishing, command and control is how you get initial access. So this was something that was a little bit more unique to Empire and a newer module, and this is how they can backdoor link files via a macro. So rather than you open up a macro-enabled Office document and it's going to spawn, the C2 server, this is going to really kind of change and disrupt that parent path and also make it a little bit stealthier. So we're going to take a look at this. We've got our Windows machine, which is our victim, and then we've got Empire here running on our Kali Linux host. This is Starkiller, the GUI, if you're not familiar with that. And we've got this important.excel file on our desktop, and we're also just showing here that our shortcuts are linking to Google Chrome or Firefox or the correct, obviously, application. So we're going to open up this macro-enabled Word document. This is going to, under the hood, replace those links on our desktop. Again, those are kind of hidden away in the cells. And yes, this isn't necessarily the most sophisticated fish. Clearly there's, better ones that prompt you why you have to click the enable content and stuff. But we can kind of go ahead and then we can see later here that when you close this, it's going to on exit change the links. So we can open this up and we're going to see that that's actually spawning PowerShell. And when the user goes to launch Chrome or something else on the desktop, again, not necessarily super stealthy there is a little PowerShell window that pops up, which is downloading and getting that C2 agent. But Chrome does pop up as you would expect, so it is definitely functional. And then we are going to see that agent checking in here on the machine. So we have that's going to pop up here and the agent's available. And then we can go and we can interact with that. So we can run our post-exploitation modules. We'll just do a really simple who am I here. But yeah, very, very easy to, use. It's a common, technique that we've seen from a lot of threat actors. I know we've been talking about macro-enabled documents before, and then as well as, where people are moving. So like the malicious OneNote files, using ISOs, other payloads for initial access. So taking a look, how do we detect this sort of activity? How do we hunt for this? And again, this is really trying to kind of disrupt that, traditional kill chain of excel.exe is spawning, CMD or PowerShell, and that exactly is what is happening here. So There are some things that Excel is spawning. This is a MS Edge web view, which is not necessarily relevant here for this attack. But we are going to see that that malicious link file on the desktop is going to be replaced. That's going to launch PowerShell. You can see that, download Cradle here, which is going to grab the C2 agent and install that, and then Chrome is going to be launched. So seeing Chrome launching from PowerShell is suspicious. Seeing that download Cradle is suspicious. Seeing the modification of the shortcuts is suspicious. Pardon me. So all of those things you can search for. So some of the detections we have in SnapAttack, you can take a look at Office creating or modifying desktop shortcuts. So this is going to be using a file creation event. You can also look at it from a process creation side. So looking to see if, PowerShell or CMD or, Explorer.exe is launching, a link. As you can see here, there's other ways that this is, being used. So Emotet's used this before, other threat actors. That whole malicious link thing, we've talked about in other snapshots, is definitely some interesting activity. Around the actual, that kind of download and execute Cradle, what that link file gets replaced as. Have a couple of detection opportunities here for this as well. So this detection is going to be looking at the EDR, command line, where we can see certain characteristics. So it's going to start the actual program, chrome.exe. It's going to modify the desktop. So you're going to see the user profile desktop, and it's going to modify the link files on there, and it runs that create shortcut PowerShell commandlet to actually create that, and it's going to put an HTTP request to download that payload. So different detection opportunities here. You can write a detection for that against EDR, or maybe more interestingly, a PowerShell event. So the module script logging, 4104. You can take a look at that script text. Again, this might be more interesting, especially if you've got obfuscation or other encoding that's being put there. So a couple of different detection strategies. Again, those you can deploy to your SIM or your EDR and be able to detect threats like, this malicious backdooring link from Empire. Another module that we wanted to talk about was PSRansom. So this is its own standalone project, but they also built this into Empire. So I know a lot of organizations, maybe it's your boss or your CISO is going to say, hey, are we protected against ransomware? And there's usually a hesitation to go and download ransomware samples and run those on your network, because what happens if those go haywire? So there are multiple ransomware simulators. We'll talk about the effectiveness on those in a minute, but wanted to show that if you are doing a red team operation and you did want to simulate ransomware activities, this is something that you can do with Empire. So again, we've got our Windows victim. We've got our Linux host that has Empire running in the background. We're not going to do anything super stealthy here, so we've just got the PowerShell one-liner, which is going to execute the agent. And if we hop over to our Linux C2, we're going to see that agent check in. Anytime here, yep, so we have that agent check in, and then we're going to use the module for PSRansom. So this is PowerShell exfiltration PSRansom. Different command line properties that we can change. So what files do we want to encrypt? So we want to do the ones on the desktop, C2 server and stuff we want to call back to. Interestingly, this project also allows you to specify the file extension. That's a really good way to test and see how your antivirus or other tools are doing, because a lot of times you'll see them behave differently with known file extensions, like a WannaCry ransomware, whereas this PSRansom uses PSR files. I'm going to back up the video a bit because this goes really quickly. So it is going to load that PowerShell module in memory. It's going to encrypt those files on the desktop. It's going to change the wallpaper. It's going to pop open a ransom note showing us which files are encrypted. So in a lot of ways, this does behave like a traditional ransomware tool. Could talk through. There are definitely detection strategies for this. A lot of them are going to be specifically to how the PowerShell is doing the encryption, and base64 encoded PowerShell, and other sort of weirdness like that. What that ends up being is that's really good at detecting PowerShell ransomware, but not necessarily generic against other ransomware types. And this is where we want to kind of pivot the discussion a little bit into ransomware simulators. How good are they? How effective? And bottom line is there's a lot of things that ransomware is going to be doing that are part of that kill chain that ransomware simulators don't always, do well. So encrypting, files that you drop, sometimes they will kind of encrypt other things that they shouldn't be doing. Dropping known extensions. Again, this is an interesting thing to, check for. Again, like what file extension is it using? A lot of times they're not going to be deleting backups, so you're not going to see, WMIC or, VSS admin deleting shadow copies. That's an important thing that a lot of ransomware does because they want to make sure that, again, you're incentivized to pay the ransom. So seeing which tools do and don't do that. Again, PSRansom is one of those that isn't doing it. And just ultimately having, context into what it's doing. So thought this blog post was interesting to show some of the capabilities that are typically seen in ransomware and if those are tested or not by your simulator. So definitely just something to keep in mind here if you are looking at ransomware and simulators that these might not always be the most effective. And if your EDR, your SIM, your other tools don't test and don't respond well to these simulators, but they do with actual ransomware, that's not necessarily a bad thing. So anyways, that's our update on Empire for the week. That's our snapshot. Comment below the video, like, subscribe. We'll see you next time.